Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. Today, I'm so excited to introduce our guest, Joyce Walder. Joyce, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Suja. Very nice to be here. Excited to get to talk to you today.
Me too. So, everyone, Joyce and her husband are part of a three-family partnership called B3 Investments based in Austin, Texas. They are accredited real estate investors specializing in multifamily assets, although they've recently transitioned to mobile home parks. Via syndications, they own multiple B and C class properties in Texas, Colorado, and New Jersey. Since 2017, they have invested in 10 multifamily deals, both passively and as the syndicators, totaling over 2,000 doors across 7 cities and 3 states, with a combined purchase price of $150 million. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being here, Joyce. Why don't you start out by taking us back in time and giving us some color on what brought you into real estate?
Absolutely. Well, my husband retired from the internet security business at a younger age than most people retire. So he realized we need a place to put the money, and he stumbled across multifamily investments through the Sumrock Group out of Dallas, Texas. So I, in a previous life, have been in commercial banking, legal assistant, and then landed in dental hygiene for about 15 years. So while I was still practicing dental hygiene, Bob began the multifamily investments, and we were just passive in the beginning and slowly came around. And due to an unfortunate injury, dental hygiene is not very nice to your body. I was no longer practicing dental hygiene. So Bob tried to get me involved in the multifamily investment business. And I attended the networking groups and I loved it. But he was so far ahead of me in the knowledge of multifamily investments that there was really not a defined role for me at that time. And we also started seeing that the deals were getting harder to come by, more expensive. There are still good deals out there, but it just became a little bit too competitive for us. So we stumbled across mobile home park investing, and we attended Frank Rolfe's Mobile Home University Boot Camp, and that is where we met our partners. So that is coming up on almost 2 years that we formed B3 Investments, and we now own, so to add to a little bit of that background that you in your introduction, we now own a mobile home park in Iowa, one in New Mexico. We are about to close on our third in Minnesota, and then we are hoping to continue to acquire mobile home communities across the nation. So it's been an exciting journey.
Awesome. That's really awesome to hear your background. And Joyce, why don't you tell us a bit about why you started transitioning from multifamily to mobile home parks? A deeper dive into that, please.
Sure, absolutely. As I mentioned, I think for me personally, it was a little bit about the lack of knowledge for me. I like to know things, I like to be in the know. And Bob was so far ahead of me. So there was a really big learning curve for me, not to mention, as I said earlier, the deals just became super competitive. We did end up sponsoring a deal in San Antonio, which we still have, and we are still very much active with the passive investments in multifamily. And again, we met some people that were investing in mobile home communities, and it is such a different model than multifamily. And it seemed at the time almost an untapped market. And so the deals are out there, they're exciting, a very different business model than multifamily, but it's very much a people business, which I really enjoy. And we are much more hands-on in the operations, the day-to-day operations, than we were ever with the multifamily passive investments.
Okay, very interesting. So I definitely appreciate how awesome of an asset class mobile home parks is, and would love to hear you expand on how the two are different. Let's start there.
I think the biggest thing is Wow, that's a tough question. The biggest thing is the market again is so much less competitive. However, we're finding over this last year that the popularity of mobile home community acquisitions is definitely skyrocketing. It's There are so many things that are similar. Maybe I'll start with that. You still have to develop the relationship with the brokers. You still have to nurture those relationships. And interestingly enough, when you transition from multifamily to mobile home communities, it is literally starting over because it's a whole new set of brokers, right? You have your familiar brokers for multifamily. Well, they don't deal with mobile home communities, and they may not have someone in their organization that does. So you are starting over from that aspect. And I think another similarity is you still want to eventually syndicate. I think for us in particular, one of the biggest differences, it's the cost of some of the communities. It's at a lower level, so we can take down these deals on our own. As you are aware, when you go into multifamily, most people begin by passively investing because that is the most affordable way to get your foot in the door there. With mobile home communities, you can find some smaller communities that you can take down on your own. And the beauty of that versus, say, the single family home industry, when you purchase the mobile home community, we prefer communities that have tenant owned homes only. With us, we don't want to be the landlord like you are with multifamily, like you are with single family. So we just rent the lot space. We don't have to deal with any repairs or maintenance of the actual homes themselves. So that's a very attractive difference right there, is that we don't have to maintain the actual structure, just the sites.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And when you have tenant owned mobile homes as opposed to park owned mobile homes, then there's this pride of ownership that I think the tenants adopt and take better care of the assets in the long run, anyways. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yes, makes a lot of
If you look at the research, it's really interesting to me that people that tend to live in mobile homes, as you mentioned, they have that pride of ownership. They own their home. They have a larger space than they would in an apartment. It's still the most affordable housing option out there. They have the bigger space. They have a yard. So it's just, I think it's also much more family oriented from that perspective, because there is more room, there is the yard, and it is theirs. It is something they own.
for sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I know you are the person on your team who handles the transitions. So tell
Yes.
me, what kind of parks are you looking for? And then how do you, what's the vision for the parks that you buy? And then what's your role as the transition operator?
Well, we have an amazing partnership, and we have, my partner Bill calls them swim lanes, and we're all very good about staying in our swim lanes. If we don't, we're very quick to call each other out and say, nope, that's my swim lane. And as I mentioned, I am the operations person. My partner Bill, he is typically the one that is helping with acquisitions and finding those parks. Our perfect park, if you will, we like to see at least 50 pad sites. We prefer city utilities within 100 miles of a metro area. We've got to have job access. And other than that, we've got a few other criteria, but those are the big ones that we really focus on. And Bill does our underwriting and begins that due diligence process. He will typically go out to the property and take a good look at it, meet with the broker if possible, meet with the owner if possible, and meet with the current property manager if that's a possibility. And then he will come back and say, yes, that's absolutely a community we want to go after. And then that whole process begins. Once we approach closing and get through all of that fun stuff, then that's where I come in as transitions person. I like to be on the site on the day of closing, because of course, when that closing does happen, there's a new owner of that community, and you have to get new leases out. And I personally like to be on the property to handle that myself. And depending on what state you are in, you either have to post it to their door, certify mail it, or USPS mail it. And in some states like Iowa, you have to do all three. So it's a big task to take on. So I like to be there on that day of closing. I like to meet any residents who walk out and just are curious about who I am and what I'm doing. I found that there's a lot of fear in that transition, and I feel it's partly my job to allay those fears and let them know that we're here to maybe fix things that were unattended to, and just make them feel comfortable that we are there to help them and to better that community.
For sure. And, I mean, that is an interesting job to have there. And it makes a lot of sense that people are concerned when there's a change in ownership. So, I'm curious, like, how on that day of closing you address like any questions that come up about rents, for example.
Right. Oh, of course. That's the first question. Are you going to raise our rent? Um, it's interesting because, as I mentioned, we attended Frank Roth's Mobile Home University boot camp, and one of his preferences for his students, if you will, is to not interact directly with the residents. His belief, from what I understand, is to let the community manager handle that transition. And I feel that the community manager is new also, and sometimes lives on the property and is probably just as frightened, fearful as the other residents. So for me, I like to go in and I feel I'm a very open, honest person. And fortunately, when we acquire a property, a rent raise is not the first thing we do. It's not day one what we do. They don't typically get a lease that all of a sudden has a new amount on it. We try very hard to stay within rent increase guidelines. And of course, a property where rent raise is possible, that is what we want, but we try to give them time. And in most states, you have to provide a 60-day notice anyway. So when I am asked that direct question of, oh, are you going to raise our rents, which I have been asked many times, I tell them at this time, no. And is it going to come? I try to be very honest with them and say, yes, eventually your rent will increase, but everything increases. The price of groceries increases, the price of gas increases, you get a raise at work, things of that nature. I try to make it very relatable to everyday life, that I am there to better your community, but yes, I'm still a business, and I am in the business of, I would like to turn a profit as well. And I don't think that's a bad thing. And I think if you are just open and honest about that, that your intentions are still very good to better their community, I don't think you get the negative judgment of, you're just going to raise my rent.
For sure. Yeah. I'm sure having that open, honest communication, and also, and genuine. And also, I'm sure in that conversation, you're talking about what sorts of improvements you're going to make to the community. Could you
Sure.
talk about some of those things that you look to try to do on a typical basis?
Right. And again, our target mobile home community, we do like to buy the ones that have been owned by mom and pop. And so again, things have been unattended. And so that's a great, way for us to go in. And there are a lot of improvements that need to be made. So roads are usually a big deal. Potholes. I mean, if you're living there and having to drive through the same pothole for 10 years and it just gets bigger, you're pretty happy when somebody fills that. And yes, it's an expense, but the way I view those things is, when residents see us actively moving forward with repairs and truly improving the community, there is more of that pride. You spoke of that earlier, where they have the pride of ownership in their home. They love to hear the community start talking about, wow, have you seen the changes out at the mobile home community? And we typically buy in a smaller town. Like I said, we like to be within 100 miles of a metro area, but we have found when you're in a small town, word gets out very quickly, and they are happy to see you there making positive changes, and the residents become prideful in that as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a great example. Working on the roads, do you have like just a couple other things that, you look to see if they need improvements on?
Sure. One of the biggest things we do, and this is something that we did learn from Frank Rolfe, we go in immediately and put new signage in. We put a nice new sign. Typically they're, older signs, not well taken care of. So it is a recognizable thing in the community. And then we also landscaping, just small landscaping of the entire community. My belief is if my common areas are not in great shape, I have a really difficult time issuing a violation to a resident whose lot does not look so well kept. So I definitely pride B3 on the fact that we will go in and make sure our common areas are nice and neat so that we can set that example for the residents. I've got plans for our community in Iowa. We want to go in and build a community barbecue area, possibly a play set for children. So very similar to what you would see in multifamily. We want to really create a sense of community in these neighborhoods. And that's, yeah, and it's been very rewarding.
Definitely. And, and this gets mentioned somewhat frequently, but can you just speak to what it is about signage that is kind of important from from that sort of just improving the community?
Sure. So one of the really simple advantages of that, and I'll get to directly to the signage in a moment, but it allows me to get to know local businesses. I will always try to use a local sign company. I try to engage with the local commerce, definitely with the local law enforcement, but signage in general, it just really signifies the change. And it's a reminder to the residents, it's a reminder to the community that there is someone new there, and we do have intentions of improving that community. And typically, just to be honest, the biggest reason is we typically come in with a new phone number. The last thing you want to do is have your old sign with the old phone number and no one can contact you. So we typically will rename the community. So we try to stay consistent with our naming. If we do buy it from a long line of family, we typically honor the family and keep that name and just change it up a little bit. But yeah, new signage, again, I think it signifies a change for the better. It's an improvement. We typically do a very large sign, which will have our website, our phone number, and it just creates a sense of, yes, positive change is coming.
For sure. That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, with the landscaping, it seems like that is just adds to the sort of dignity that people can feel and a sense of home, right? When the place feels nice and it feels like it's improving. I mean, this is where people live, so it's when you're making improvements to just the way it feels to be in a place, and people know that you want to invest back in the community and make it a nice place for them. That goes so far with resident relations.
Oh, absolutely. The landscaping, one of the biggest things that we have found that we have to do is tree trimming. The trees just are left unattended. Limbs are growing into electrical wires. They're on top of homes, which is just a hazard. It's very dangerous to have that. Shrubs will be overgrown and things of that nature. So that's the biggest thing. And again, sometimes a tree will have been cut down, but the stump is still there. Well, nobody wants that in their yard. So we will spend the money and go in and remove that and put grass down. It changes the overall appearance of the community just by doing those small things. And again, to me, the residents do see that as, oh, wow, yeah, this is my home. Thank you for doing that. They don't have the time, the money to do it. And technically, it is our tree. So I feel that is our obligation to make sure that their homes are safe.
For sure. Yeah, that's just some really good color on the types of things. It might seem small, but when you add up all these small changes, I mean, it's something that residents are going to be touching or seeing every single day. And so it does add to the quality of their life.
Absolutely, without a doubt.
So what else comes to mind when you think about your transition process?
As I mentioned a little bit earlier, I definitely arrange meetings with the local Chamber of Commerce. I try to arrange a meeting with the local chief of police. I have found that to be extremely valuable. Depending on what class multifamily you're talking about, as we all know, mobile home parks can have a not so great reputation in the community. And I have found that working with local law enforcement has been so valuable to truly clean up the community. If there are problem residents there, I take it very personally, and we will confront that issue. And with the help of local law enforcement, I have really changed a little bit of the demographic in our community in Iowa. And the residents are so thankful when something like that gets accomplished. And I have found that communicating with the chief of police on at least a monthly basis, sometimes I hear from him more. And even if I'm a believer of, even if things aren't bad, I still like to communicate with him and say, hey, just checking in, everything in the community is going smoothly, knock on wood. And always try to really thank and let them know that his officers, his department, they're so appreciated for what they do, because they are so important in my transition process. I don't care if it's a barking dog. Residents are encouraged, call the local police department, because that's against my rules and regulations. And it does require the residents to also be involved in fixing that problem. So I am a stickler for enforcing our rules and regulations. And sometimes that irritates residents. However, they appreciate that if I don't enforce them, we can't better the community.
For sure. Yeah. Um, that makes a lot of sense. So when you first reach out to, say, the police department, what does that conversation go? Just to give us an idea.
It's very interesting. As I mentioned, we're about to close on the community in Minnesota, and I have already reached out to that chief of police. I tried to start building that relationship before closing because I want to set the meeting for when I am there. And that particular conversation was very interesting because it turns out it is a community where rules have not been enforced. They know of some issues that are in that community. I informed this chief of my relationship with the chief of police in Iowa, and he was so happy to hear that we were purchasing this community and that we were willing to work with him and his department to really make some positive changes in that community. Again, mobile home parks are very tricky. They're private property. So local law enforcement has a difficult time enforcing some of the laws due to that fact. So as owner of the community, I give them my personal cell phone number, and I give them my permission to enter that property 24/7. They have to know that the owner of the community has their back, because it is private property, and some of those problem residents that we spoke of, they know that what they can and can't get away with. And I have had a problem resident who is no longer there literally say that to the police officer. You can't do anything to me. This is private property. And fortunately, the officer was able to say, no, I have Joyce's phone number right here and I will call her right now. You need to leave. And they know I'm going to support them. And I think it is a very new thing for these chiefs of police. They're not used to working with owners in that way. So I love that part of it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's important to have those community partnerships, especially when it can be mutually beneficial. Just to give the listeners an idea of the types of problem tenants
Sure.
that you may encounter, can you maybe highlight some of those?
I can. And, it's always a touchy subject, but yes, it's worth mentioning. Again, I know these problems occur in a lot of different communities. An issue and has been an issue. I'm not going to say it's an issue in every park, but in one particular park in our Iowa park, even the trash collector was telling me how awful the drug use was in this particular home. And this particular problem resident had been a problem in law enforcement for years, literally years. So with my effort in participating and working with local law enforcement, we did get that resident out of our community and he ended up leaving the city. So the chief of police was very grateful to me. So that was kind of fun because because we had to work together. I didn't turn my head and ignore the problem. And it's not always fun. That's not always a fun thing to do, but yeah, the drug use has been our biggest problem so far that we've encountered. Um, Actually, right now in our park in New Mexico, we have an issue with graffiti. For some reason, that seems to be, and it's an issue because again, we're private property. So, and interestingly enough, we know who's doing it. But it's just very, very difficult to keep that level of persistence to actually make it stop.
Mhm.
It's not always easy.
Yeah, interesting. Well, it sounds like you're an amazing problem solver, and Joyce, you and your team clearly, yeah, are just finding a wonderful niche for yourself and helping really make affordable housing communities nicer for the residents that are there. And I just think that's a wonderful service to the community. So thank you so much for coming on and giving us a taste of what mobile home park operations actually look like. Would love to have you share with the listeners how they can get in touch with you and anything else you'd like to share.
Thank you, Suja. I absolutely appreciate it. You can definitely take a look at our website at B as in boy, the number 3, communities.com. That's our website, b3communities.com. And I can be reached at 512-846-3035. Or you can email me at Joyce at B as in boy, the number 3 .investments. And I would love to hear from you guys. Happy to answer any questions that anyone may have. And again, Suja, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much for being here, Joyce. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.